Alrighty, here we are, chapter 24. Will performed in the men Will performed in the men-at-arms barracks that evening. It was normal practice for a juggler to spread himself around. After all, if he were to perform in the main hall every night, the audience there would soon grow bored with his repertoire, and the soldiers in a remote castle such as Mackendale could often prove to be more than generous. They had little to spend their money on in a small remote shire like this one. As a result, he could expect to make his purse considerably heavier if they enjoyed his work. Furthermore, while a visiting entertainer might expect a small cash bonus from the castle lord at the end of his tenure, his chief payment came in the form of shelter, food, and accommodation. A performer looking for hard cash would usually find it among the soldiers or at the local tavern, if there were one. In addition to all these excellent reasons, Will had another motive for taking himself to the barracks room that evening. Oh, that night, sorry. He wanted to get the men talking, to hear the local gossip and rumours about the forbidding Grimsdale Wood and the Black Mere, and nothing loosened men's tongues like an evening of music and wine, he thought wryly. By now he had become an accepted part of Mackendale's life, and people would be more likely to open up to him. In addition, the men-at-arms would feel more secure than the country folk who went home each night from the cracked flagon to their isolated, unprotected homes and farms. The men here were well armed and relatively secure behind the solid walls of a castle that, if nothing else, would help to make their tongues a little looser. He was greeted cheerfully when he arrived, all the more so when he produced a large flagon of apple brandy to help the night along. His standard repertoire of country folk songs, jigs, and reels were exactly what this audience wanted, and he added a few of the bawdier numbers he had been taught by Berrigan as well, Old Scully's daughter, and a rather coarser parody of the Knights of Dark Renown, titled The Knights Whose Pants Fell Down, among others. The evening was a success, and the coins showered into his mandola case as the hours passed. At length he had half a dozen of the group were left lolling around the dying fire, brandy tankards in their hands. He had set the mandola aside. The singing was over for the night, and the men were content with that. He had given them good value, and now he once again experienced the strange performance where, having performed for an audience for an hour or so, he was accepted into their midst as if they had known him all their lives. The talk was the usual chatter of bored soldiers. It concerned the shortage of available farmers in the area, and the boredom of a life in a remote castle, hemmed in by the winter snow. It was a boredom tinged with fear, however. There was no telling when the Scotty tribes might launch an attack across the border, and, of course, there was troubling mystery surrounding the Lord's illness. As the men talked more freely, Will probed subtly and discovered that they had little respect for his son Ormond. "He's no warrior," one of the men said in a disgusted tone. "I doubt he could hold a sword, let alone swing it." There was a rumble of agreement from the others. "Kieran's the one for us," said another. "He's a real man, not some jumped-up bookworm with his nose forever stuck in a scroll. That's when he's not looking down at as such as us," a third put in, and again there was an angry growl of assent. "But as long as he's Siren's heir, we're stuck with him," the man added. "What sort of man is Siren?" Will ventured to ask. Their eyes turned to him, and they waited for the most senior among them, the Sergeant Major, to answer. "A good man, a good laird, and a brave fighter, a just leader too. But he's to his bed now, and little chance he'll recover, if you ask me. And we need him now more than ever, with milkmen on the loose again," said one of the soldiers. Will looked at him and recognized the sentry he had spoken to when he had left the castle several nights previously. "Milkman," he said. He's this wizard you talk about, isn't he?" There was a moment of silence, and several of the men glanced over their shoulders into the shadows beyond the flickering lights of the fire. Then the sentry answered him. "Ay, he's laid a curse on our Lord Siren. He lurks in the forest of his, surrounded by his creatures." He hesitated, not sure if he had said too much. It went by I went by there the other night, Will admitted. You made me curious with your warnings. I tell you what I saw and heard there was enough to keep me out of Grimsdale Wood in future. Thought you would, said the sentry. You young ones always want no better than those who seek to advise you. You're lucky you got away. Others haven't, he added darkly. But where did this milkman come from? Will asked. This time another man joined the conversation, a grizzled soldier whose grey beard and hair bespoke his long service in the castle. He was among us for years, he said. We all thought he was harmless, just a simple herbalist and healer, but he was bidding his time, letting us become unwary. Then strange things began to happen. There was a child who died when all knew that it was within Malcolm's power to heal him. Malcolm let him die, they say, and another say he used the spirits for his evil purpose. There were those who wanted to make him pay for his sins, but before we could do anything about it, he escaped into the forest, and that was the end of it, Will asked. The soldier shook his head. There were stories, dark stories, that he surrounded himself with monsters, misshapen, ugly beings they were, creatures with the evil eye and the mark of the devil on them, hunchbacks and dwarves and worse. Occasionally they had been seen at the edge of the forest. We knew he was doing the devil's work, and when Lord Siren fell under a spell, we knew who had cast it. No coincidence there, said the sentry. The others nodded assent. And what does Ormond do? Continued the old soldier. He reads those weird scrolls of his late into the night when decent folk are in their beds. Well, what we need is leadership, and someone with the guts to face up to Malcolm and drive him out of Grimsdale once and for all. Need more men if we're to do that. We need more men if we're to do that, said the sergeant major. We couldn't face down his monsters with just a dozen of us. Ormond should be recruiting. At least Karen's been doing something about that. The other man shook his head. Not sure I like what he's doing there, he said. Some of those men he's recruiting, they're barely more than bandits, you ask me. When you need fighting men, Aldous Amsley, you take what you can get, said the sergeant major. I'll grant you they ain't no bunch of choir boys, but I reckon Karen can control them all right. Will pricked up his ears at the words. This was something new, he thought. Nevertheless, he was careful to keep his expression disinterested. He even managed a yawn before he asked, as casually as he could manage, Karen's recruiting men? The sergeant major nodded. As Aldous says, you wouldn't want to look too closely at their past, but I reckon the time will come when we need hard men, and we won't argue too much about them then. Will looked around the barracks. They're not quartered here, he asked. This time it was Aldous who answered. He's keeping them separate. They have quarters in the keep tower. He said that was a better arrangement. It'd avoid any chances of friction. It was apparent that the members of the normal garrison had accepted this reasoning without any question. Will clicked his tankard against his teeth thoughtfully. Maybe it did make sense, he thought. Throwing two separate groups of fighting men together in the rather basic conditions of the barracks room might well be a recipe for trouble. Still, there was something about the arrangement that was a little unsettling. Maybe, said the sergeant major, when you consider the situation between Sir Karen and Lord Ormond, Sir Karen thinks it's wise to have a group of men loyal to him. Not that he have any trouble from us, mind. Although, said Aldous, we are sworn to obey the orders of the rightful lord of the castle, and with Lord Siren out of action, that's Ormond, whether we like it or not. Sworn or not, chipped a third soldier. I doubt he'd find any of us willing to act against Karen. The others all mumbled assent, but it was a low mumble, and one or two glanced over their shoulders once more, aware of the dangerous nature of the sentiments they were expressing. A silence fell over the group, and Will thought it best to move on. He didn't want anyone to register the fact that he'd been pumping them for information. "Ah, well," he said, one thing's for sure. With Sir Karen's men in the tower, there are fewer to share the rest of this brandy, and there's precious little left. He grinned at them, and the mood lightened as he passed a flagon round the eagerly offered tankards. he managed to appear as if he were filling his own, although he had contrived all night to avoid drinking too much, and as well he had, he reflected. There were a lot to think about in what had been discussed this evening. He began to wish that he'd waited another day before sending his report to Holt and Crowley. Even as he had that thought, the two senior rangers were studying the report that the wary pigeon had delivered barely half an hour before. There had been storms and strong winds on its path south, but the sturdy little bird had flown on through the weather, arriving at Castle Arlen wet and nearly exhausted. A handler had gently detached the message from its leg and placed the fateful little bird in a warm hunch in one of the Castle Arlen's soaring towers. Now, feathers fluffed out and head tucked under its wing, it slept, its task completed. Not so Holt and Crowley. The ranger commander paced back and forth in its room as Holt read through Will's truncated sentences once more. Finally, the grey-bearded ranger looked up at his chief with a frown. "I wish you'd stop that pacing," he said mildly. Crowley made a gesture of irritation. I'm worried, damn it," he said, and Holt raised one eyebrow. "You don't say," he said with mild irony. "Well, now that we have established that fact, and I have conceded that yes, you are worried, perhaps you might stop your interminable pacing. If I stop it, it can hardly be interminable, can it?" Crowley challenged him. Holt pointed to a chair on the other side of the table. "Just humour me and sit down," he said. Crowley shrugged and did as he was asked. He sat for a full 5 seconds, then he was up and pacing again. Holt muttered something under his breath. Crowley summarized correctly that it was uncomplimentary and chose to ignore it. "The problem is," he said, "Bill's report raises more questions than it answers." Holt nodded agreement. He was about to come to his former apprentice's defense, but he realized that Crowley wasn't criticizing Bill's report. He was merely stating a fact. There were a lot of unanswered questions in the brief message. Strange sights and sounds in the wood, apparently caused by a person or person unknown. Friction at the castle between Ormond and his cousin, Ormond's apparent inability to command, and the fact that someone, presumably Ormond, had arranged for Alice to be followed when she went on her morning ride. In most castles it would have been an interesting set of occurrences. In a valuable strategic site like Mackendale, close to a hostile border, it was downright dangerous. Still, "It's early days yet," he said finally, and Crowley dropped into the chair again, sprawling sideways, one leg cocked over the arm. He sighed deeply, knowing Holt was right. "I know," he said. "I just wonder if there might be more than Will and Alice can handle up there," he said. Holt considered the point. "I trust Will," he said, and Crowley made a gesture of agreement. In spite of his youth, Will was highly regarded in the Rangers, more highly than he knew, and Pauline says Alice is one of her best agents. Lady Pauline was a senior member of the diplomatic services. She had recruited Alice originally and undertaken her early training. Alice was as much her protege as Will was Holt's. Yes, they're the right choices for the task, I know, and if we send in too many people, we run the risk of exposing our hand, and we could end up doing more harm than good. It's just I have a funny feeling about this, like someone is behind me, and I can sense them, but I can't see them. You understand?" Holt nodded. "I've got the same feeling, but as you say, if we overdo things, we'll give the game away." There was a long silence between them. They were both in agreement, but they also both had the same uneasy feeling. "Of course, we could always send maybe one more person to help out if they need it," Holt suggested. Crowley looked at him quickly. "One more person wouldn't be overdoing it," he said. "Someone who could provide a bit of muscle if they need it," Holt continued, "to cover their backs, as it were. I think I'd feel a bit better knowing they had even a little bit more backup," Crowley said. "And of course," Holt added, "if we send the right person, he might provide more than just a little bit." The eyes of both men went over the table. They were old comrades and friends. They had known each other for decades, served together in more campaigns than either could remember. Each knew exactly what the other was thinking, and each Each was in complete agreement with each other. "You're thinking Horace," Crowley asked, and Holt nodded. "I'm thinking Horace," he said. Alrighty, I'd like to thank you very much for listening to read out the chapter 24. If you'd like to listen to me read chapter 25, then please stay posted and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.